Okay, we are at the end of the semester, which is exciting. Some of you are finishing your undergraduate degree this semester. Some of you may have another semester go, and maybe some of you a little longer. But what the purpose of this last presentation, maybe it's last, I don't know, maybe I'll throw in another one. But one of the last presentations is to start showing you a little bit more about pulling it all together, putting it all together to understand endurance performance. Now, I will be focusing in on physiology for this. Well, we have focused on physiology for this class, but to really understand endurance performance, we need to understand all aspects of exercise science. And you'll see that in just a bit. Now, I have to warn you, we may get interrupted here because we are fostering a feral cat and her four kittens. This is Goose. Goose has not found a home yet, but for whatever reason, the four kittens have enjoyed climbing on my chair, and so they're at a stage now that I refer to them endearingly as the little devils. So we may get disturbed as we go through this presentation, and hopefully they don't climb up my back. All right, so putting it all together. Really, the goal of this class is not just to go through nuts and bolts of physiology, but to really understand how to take our physiology that we're learning in different classes and start applying it to understand endurance performance. And really, we need information from other classes too: biomechanics, functional anatomy, anatomical kinetics, nutrition, motor control, sports medicine. We need all these different areas to really understand endurance performance. Now, I've used this model in the past, and I like it to be able to really emphasize the different areas that we need to understand in a simple, what I think is a simple way. Endurance performance, or really any endurance, any performance, any muscle contraction, is really a function of taking chemical energy in the body, or fats or carbohydrates, maybe proteins, and transforming that chemical energy to mechanical energy. Mechanical energy is a force applied over some distance over time. And in the body, we transform that energy from the chemical state to the mechanical state through the aerobic and anaerobic energy pathways. And we know that those pathways are only about 30%-ish efficient, meaning that the other remaining energy is transformed into something other than mechanical energy. And most likely that's just going to be heat. And so we have thermoregulation issues, either trying to retain that heat, or we want to be able to get rid of that heat, depending on if we're trying to exercise in a cold or a warm environment. Now, under chemical energy in this class, we've really focused in on fuel sources: carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. We talked about storage of those fuels. We've talked about fuel intake before, during, and after. And that's really been the focus of what we've covered in this class. And this is there's much more information out there on this aspect of fuels: types of fats, types of carbohydrates, how much processing involved, using processed food versus naturally occurring foods. There's lots of different debates out there about the fuels to use before, during, and after exercise. And it's an exciting area to read up on and to really understand what works for improving endurance performance. So we want to transform that fuel, that chemical energy, to mechanical energy. We do that through the energy systems. Well, training is all about improving the ability of those energy pathways to transform chemical energy to mechanical energy. That's all they're built. That's what the end result of our training program is, to improve the ability to transfer how much and how fast we can transform chemical energy to mechanical energy. And we know when we're designing a training program, that's an interplay of frequency, intensity, time, and mode. We've touched on some of this through this semester. Mostly intensity is what we've dealt with, a bit with mode in terms of things like graded exercise tests, how they results may be different if you're doing swim, bike, or run test. But we've talked about intensity quite a bit, the influence that has on fuel substrate used or physiological responses, things like that. We've talked about monitoring training, or not so much monitor training, but we have talked about heart rate response during training. We haven't talked too much about power. That actually starts to move more towards our biomechanics of endurance performance class, trying to understand that. But we have mentioned the terms or gone through terms like aerobic power or anaerobic power. And those terms are simply describing how fast we can transform chemical energy to mechanical energy aerobically or anaerobically. And we did spend some time on lactate, and there may be some value in monitoring lactate, but lactate is a byproduct of the anaerobic metabolism, anaerobic energy pathway. And if we understand the amount of lactate in the blood, we're understanding, in essence, how active the anaerobic pathway is. And that may be helpful for understanding training programs. And we did talk quite a bit about thermoregulation, sweat rate, how much hydration to take in, clothing influences on maintaining thermoregulation, and even posted some information on using wetsuits to maintain core temperature during swimming. On the far right side of this slide is mechanical energy, and that's where we start talking about developing a propulsive force and understanding the magnitude of force or direction of force, or even the coordination of different muscles to generate a net force. This now starts moving more into biomechanics of endurance performance. And if you've taken that class, we've spent more time on this side of this model, or if you're going to take that class, this is where we'll be in this model, is spending more time on understanding the forces involved, both the propulsive forces as well as the resistance forces, drag forces, rolling resistance, biking uphill type forces, running uphill type of forces. And interestingly, this is really why when we're training, we often do movement drills or really focusing on technique, because we are trying to learn the best way to generate the right amount of force applied at the right moment in time in the right direction in order to be as effective in our movement as possible, and relating back to this class, being as economical as possible. So having running economy be as low as possible for a given speed, or lowest VO2 for a given speed. All right, so this sort of spans the two courses that I offer for understanding endurance performance, but it also goes into many more areas of exercise science in general, sports nutrition, motor control, coordination type of thing. And down here, obviously, I've got injury, too much, too soon, too fast. A lot of times we do too much change. We don't allow the body enough time to recover from the stress, Hans Salyer's model, and ultimately we get an injury. And so this gets more into sports medicine. So putting it all together, I really like to emphasize, to understand endurance performance, in order to do an iron distance event, in order to do a marathon, a half marathon, you have to understand exercise science as a whole. And this class has been focused on the physiology of endurance performance, but it's much more, our performance endurance-wise, it's much more a function of lots of different areas. If you've taken a class with me before, you've seen me present this type of model in those classes. I present it in pretty much every class I teach. I like to approach every class with the idea that everyone's interested in understanding performance. Performance is nothing more than a bunch of movements put together, flexions, extensions, rotations, and that's functional anatomy. You took that in 245, the anatomical kinesiology. From a physics perspective, movement is nothing more than a displacement in time period. In undergrad biomechanics 346, you spent some time understanding kinematics, position, velocity, and acceleration. The displacement in time is caused by forces. That's our area of mechanics called kinetics. That's where we spent time understanding Newton's laws of motion. And we have both internal forces, muscles, bone on bone forces. And we also have external forces, the ground pushing on us, gravity pushing on us, pulling on us whichever way, or any other external force external to the body. But all those fall into the branch of mechanics called kinetics. Forces cause displacement time, which causes movement, flexion, extension. We put those movements together in a particular way and we have a performance. Internal forces are coming from muscles, as I mentioned, and muscles generate force based upon how fast the muscles is being asked to contract, so force velocity relationship, how long the muscle is, so a length tension relationship, and it's a function of the energy systems employed. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive list here. Muscles are generating forces, causing a displacement time of a segment. That's a movement. We put a name on that movement and put those movements together and we have performance. Well, how do muscles know what to do? Well, the central nervous system or nervous system in general tells muscles what to do. Muscles have to generate the right amount of force, the right moment in time, in order to have the right movement, in order to have the correct and the best performance. And I do put environment in this model. Environment is not only environment like what we've talked about in this class, which is sort of a weather type environment, altitude, temperature, humidity, wind. Those are environmental factors, but it could also be psychological, where maybe, the example I always use is going down and throwing or shooting free throws. In my backyard, I'm pretty good. But if I get called down in the middle of a game at halftime with 20,000 people watching a game, and I'm asked to, shoot free throws, it's a very different experience. Because now we have an environment, something external to me in that example, that may influence my performance. It may influence what my brain tells my muscles what to do. And the muscles may be generating the wrong amount of force or applying the force at the wrong amount of time or in the wrong direction, which leads to the wrong displacement in the wrong time period, which leads to an incorrect movement, which leads to an error in performance, or I missed the basket or shoot an air ball, whatever. But this also comes into play with motivation, external factors to the person driving this entire model. Over here in red, what I have here are different areas of exercise science highlighted. So, and again, not exhaustive, but these are most areas that we talk about in our department. It's sports psychology. Motor control is all about motor coordination. Exercise physiology, so physiology during exercise, before exercise, after exercise. Nutrition, or maybe more specifically, sports nutrition, biomechanics, anatomy and physiology. And motor learning is we do a performance and we do it again and again and again and again, and we learn. And I have sports medicine down here, which has to encompass this entire model, because you can have an injury anywhere along here. We can have a psychological injury. We can have an injury to the nervous system. We can have injuries to muscles. We have injuries to anatomical structures. And so really, a lot of times in a class, you focus in on one area, maybe biomechanics. In biomechanics, you focus in on these areas of understanding performance, but you cannot ignore these other areas. Same thing, in this class, we're focused on physiology. We're focused more up here. We can't ignore these other areas to understand performance. We have to pull all these different areas together. So part of your semester project is doing that as well, but we're more focused in on the physiology aspect of understanding performance. But I know in each of your projects, you tend to pull in these other areas, and that's important. It's important to recognize how we do that. All right, so now let me give you a little example, a little insight of how I do that. As you know, I'm very interested in competing in triathlons, and more specifically in iron distance events. And I've done many iron distance events, and I enjoy them because they are a big challenge. I enjoy the shorter races too. Those are fun and can be very serious, but the aspect of Ironman or iron distance events is that they really force you to understand all different aspects of exercise science to try to do well. All right, so here's just some insight in how and I'm getting attacked in the back here by one of the little devils. So, okay, yeah. All right, so let's see. So an Ironman, swim point 2.4 miles, bike 112 miles, and run a marathon. The estimated calories based upon some of the equations that we've gone through in this class and maybe other classes that you've had are listed there. Now, I've also listed what I have measured in terms of using a Garmin watch, which is reasonable. To really measure calories, what I would need to do is measure how active my aerobic system is throughout the entire event, which means I would need to use a portable metabolic system. And that's not very practical, especially during the swim. So these are estimated, and you can see they're pretty close. And then even the number of calories per hour, because a lot of times we want to know the rate of calories being used, because it does relate back to how fast we can get fuel into our system and if we can match the rate of calories being used. Okay, so prepping for an Ironman event, I look at the amount of stored fuel I may have, and that's based upon body composition. So I go down and do a body comp test on our scales and get a sense for how much of my body weight is fat. And that can tell me how many calories I have in fat that I can transform to mechanical energy. So this is stored energy. All right. And so this is telling us, in essence, the energetic cost of locomotion, how much calories, how much VO2 I could use to cover a particular distance. So as you can see, there's 63,000 calories stored for this example, but the total calories needed for an iron distance event are only about 7,000 calories. So what's the big problem? Why is nutrition such a big deal? Well, part of it is that we know our physiology, that fats burn in the carbohydrate flame, that in order for fats to be used in the energetic pathway, we need some carbohydrate to be used or available as well. And if that carbohydrate is not available, everything stops or everything starts to slow down. So the solution to that, we've got to be able to take in some carbohydrate in order to use fat as a fuel, and maybe even take in some things to simulate or stimulate use of fat. And maybe I even need to set my training program up in a way that I'm training my body to use fat as a fuel, because there's plenty of calories on the body that I can transform to mechanical energy in terms of fat. Not as much stored in carbohydrate. We went through that pretty good in chapter 2 of the book. All right, so putting things in motion, I need to have a fueling plan when I approach each of these races. I need to know what type of fuel I'm going to take in and how much I'm going to take in, and the timing of taking that in. So here down in this slide, I have fuel plan. Plan out the breakfast, because we know what was eaten last does influence what is going to be used in terms of substrate. So I really think carefully and practice carefully the type of fuel used for breakfast. And on the bike, I look at different products available or different fuels available. I look at what a race will provide during an event based upon aid stations, what type of fuel they'll be handing out. And same thing on the run. Look at the type of fuel I'm going to use, and also match that up with what's available on the course. And then I do plan out the timing of this and get a sense for how many calories I'm taking in. And there you can see in this plan, about 3,700 total calories taken in, which is about half of what I actually need to complete this event. Where is the other half coming from? That's the stored calories in the body, hopefully the fat, and some of the carbohydrate that's stored in the body as well, glucose and liver glycogen, muscle glucose and liver glycogen. The other thing to keep in mind is we are transforming this energy from the chemical state to the mechanical state, and gone through this several times. It's only about 33% efficient. It depends on how you do your math and where's your starting point and ending point. Nevertheless, there are thermal regulation issues. And so one of the big things with prepping for an iron distance event is looking at the weather. So in this example, I have Arizona because I was partly, I put this slide together in prepping for Ironman Arizona in 2019. And you can see there, I did determine what my sweat rate was going to be for this type of temperature. So about a liter per hour. So I now need to start thinking about how much fluid to be taken in per time, given the temperatures and the humidity that I may experience during an event. So really, we spend a lot of time in prepping for a race by looking at the weather forecast, historical weather, keeping an eye on that, so we can adjust our training program, or excuse me, our race day plan as needed. Because my plan for a hot, humid race is going to be quite different than a cold race. So when I did Norseman, that was a very different type of plan. So here's a hydration plan. Pre-swim, we plan out what we're going to take before the swim, then what the plan is to do during the bike ride, and then in transition to what to do, and then run. I've listed here as tolerated because a lot of times in these events, you end up with these gastrointestinal problems or GI problems, where if you don't hit the right intensity, or if you don't eat correctly or drink correctly, by the time you get to your run, your gut starts to shut down and it makes it really hard to get fluid or fuel into the body. And so at this point, I've run into several problems with that during the different events. And so I have a run plan that's as tolerated. I take my fuel with me, and then I try to sip and drink along the way. We have an expected weight loss there, about 5%. So, which would end up for me being about 9 pounds. All right, so now let's go through each segment of the race. And again, in prepping for a race, these are things that we focus on. For the swim, we look at the water temperature and decide what equipment to wear. For this race listed here, again, this would have been Ironman Arizona, although the map is from Ironman Mount Tremblant. For Arizona, the water temp was going to be about 60, low 60s, low 62, somewhere around there. And so now there's the question of when you would wear a thermal cap or a heavy cap over your head to stay warm, or wear a thermal wetsuit. So when I did Norseman, which was down around 55 degrees temp, then I wore a lot of warm gear. When I've done other races like Kona, the water's warmer and you can't wear a wetsuit because the water's too warm. And so you have to pick the correct suit or the correct gear to either stay cooler or to retain some heat while you're swimming. Oh, and then pacing wise, we spent a lot of time practicing pacing for an event. This is swimming 4,200 yards, 2.4 miles. And so you do need to have a good pacing plan throughout that, and not have lots of variations during the swim. Okay, so then we get out of the swim, we go to the bike, and you do put together a bike pacing plan. Now, this gets more into biomechanics of endurance performance, but this is a graded exercise test that you can be done to determine your maximum power that you can generate. You determine what's called your functional threshold power, which is analogous to anaerobic threshold. It's a measure of power that you can sustain for an hour, and you often develop your intensity plan based upon that FTP rating, functional threshold power rating. Again, that's more biomechanics of endurance performance. But here I've got some data, VO2 max, 58 mLs per kg per minute. We know our lactate thresholds occur somewhere around 80% VO2 max, and so staying below that threshold for an iron distance event, again, going to be 112 miles. usually takes me anywhere from my best is 4 hours 55 minutes, and I don't know what my slowest is, but anywhere probably around 5.5 hours at this point. Uh, that will tell me if I go back and look at that rate of oxygen consumption, then that will tell me what wattage I can sustain for that rate of oxygen consumption. That can tell me a heart rate that I can monitor that should predict VO2. And that gives me a target uh, power that I want to sustain and the heart rate associated with that target power. So now I'm blending biomechanics and endurance performance. Now with this test, I also did a lactate threshold test. So this is blood lactate on the axis here, and this is power on the x-axis down here. And you can start to see that lactate really start to take off. That starts to tell me at 250 watts, I'm starting to generate lots of lactate, and I'm not able to remove that lactate from the system. So I start to see that accumulate in the blood. For an iron distance event, I want to stay well below that threshold of increase in lactate. Okay, so then we get to the run plan, and yeah, my plan for this race was to just be able to run. If you are able to bike, swim correctly, and if you're able to bike at the correct intensity, then you can get off and have a successful run. Far too many times we run into a problem. I could even say I have run into a problem of biking too hard and then not being able to sustain a run for a marathon. But that's the trick, is trying to take in the right amount of fuel and exercise at the right intensity, so by the time you get to the run, you can actually have a good running plan and sustain that plan. Usually for an iron distance event, I want to stay between 100 and 120 beats per minute for heart rate. And you can see this part here. This is some stopping. And this is from a race where I did run into a problem, and I did have to stop for a period of time to recover, and then to be able to start running again at that point. Now, to sort of highlight some of the blending of different areas or pulling in from different areas, I have taken several measurements during different iron distance events. I've swallowed an ingestible core temperature pill. I've monitored core temperature, or I've analyzed core temperature data after a race. I've worn a continuous blood glucose monitor during an event to try to monitor what's happening at blood glucose levels throughout the race. Obviously, with wearable technology, it's easy to measure heart rate. This also measures stroke rate for swimming, having a power meter on the bike, and even this watch will measure run cadence. And so I've done some measurements and looked at what happens during the swim, the bike, the run with stride frequency or stroke rate. This would be cycling revolutions per minute. This would be stride rate for running and a stroke rate for swimming. This is blood glucose levels in the orange. This red line is heart rate data. This blue line is the core temperature that's happening here. And I've tried to work backwards to understand what was happening in an event and why something may have broken down and did not go so well. And I'll tell you, it's really hard to figure that out. For example, here my blood glucose level spikes, but yet I was having some of the hardest time running at this stage of the marathon. This is mile 22. And so it's odd how blood glucose is going up, but yet I was having a harder time actually sustaining a run pace. But that's the big picture of understanding iron distance performance is it's not always just blood glucose. It's not just power. It's not stroke rate. It's not heart rate. We really got to understand the whole system to really understand endurance performance and to try to get everything working together so you ultimately have a successful race and reach that finish line. So I hope, that includes things like sleep. That includes like having the right mental approach in this run portion. We always talk about athletes running into the dark periods where where you really struggle with wanting to stop or wanting to quit the event because it's reached a point where it's really hard. So that's the psychology aspect of it. You also lose coordination sometimes, and you lose balance. People fall or trip in this stage of a race as well. So, but if you put everything together correctly, hopefully you hit that finish line and you're successful and you've had a great race. And I think any finish line that you reach is a success, no matter what the time is. Sometimes we do it faster than other times, and trying to learn material like we've covered in this class is a part of trying to improve endurance performance. So to understand how to be a better iron distance athlete, this class is part of it, but biomechanics of endurance performance is important. Functional anatomy is important. Motor coordination is important. Sports nutrition is important. Sports psychology is important. Sports medicine, rehab of injuries is important. Preventing injuries. It's the whole package. I hope that you have enjoyed focusing in on the physiology of endurance performance. And some of that has been helpful to you if you're looking to do an event, or if you're looking to be in this fitness industry where you're trying to help someone improve their endurance performance, whether that's through physical therapy, occupational therapy, cardiac rehabilitation, athletic training, where you're trying to get someone back to a functional level, or if it's more performance based and you're trying to coach people or help people train or lose weight. I hope that you can see that the physiology is a keystone to understanding performance, but it's not the end all. We need to understand all aspects of exercise science. So I hope you're hitting your finish line with your undergraduate degree successfully, and that you're going to be happy. And I hope you've gotten something out of this course, and that you've enjoyed the topic. So thanks for watching the videos and being part of the class.